Archie looked dreadful. "Whatever's the matter, darling?" Amelia took his hand and looked up at him. Archie, almost in tears, kept apologising over and over again, and finally managed to blurt out his story. He had gone home, he said, to talk to his father, and to try to find a way out of the awful mess he was in. Archie's mother had died when he was a small child, and her last wish had been that Archie would marry Penelope, the daughter of her greatest friend. It had been set in stone from that very time that the pair would marry when Penelope was 21. Her birth date was in 6 months, and the families wanted to start planning the wedding. Archie had gone back to the island to break off the engagement, but his father would hear nothing of it. He had told Archie to go back to London and to get this new girl out of his system. Amelia was devastated. Archie had lied to her. That he had done so to save her feelings did not make her feel any better. She asked him to leave. Truthfulness was important to Amelia, and Archie's lies shook her to her very core. If he had lied about that, then what else might he have lied about? Amelia wondered. Perhaps he had never loved her at all. It was more than she could bear. Amelia was beside herself with grief. She had fallen passionately in love with Archie, and could not have imagined a life without him. Too distraught to eat or sleep, she was listless and cried endlessly. Sir Douglas was terribly worried, and tried to coax her to eat by cooking vast pots of chicken soup and deliciously light cakes. Amelia tried to please him, but found that since Archie had gone, nothing tasted the same. Jim tried to cheer her up by nudging her knee with his nose, but even that did no good. Amelia distractedly patted his head, but all she really wanted to do was listen to sad songs and lie on her bed sobbing. Life without Archie had lost all its gloss. Each day she wished she could turn back the clock to when she was happy. One morning, about 3 months after Archie had left, Amelia took Jim to the park. After a few minutes she found herself walking past the spot where she and Archie had met. Strong until that point, she was horrified to find herself crying. She had tried hard to pull herself together, but everything reminded her of him. He had left a sweater at her house, and Amelia often snuggled up in it. She knew she ought to throw it out, but somehow she just could not. She played their song over and over again, and although she managed to give the appearance that she was coping, her heart had not mended, and she doubted it ever would. Suddenly Jim raced off. Lately he had stayed at his mistress's side, almost as if he knew she needed to be treated with extra care. But something had caught his attention, and he was gone in a flash. When 10 minutes had passed and Jim had still not come back, Amelia started to worry. She walked their usual route, calling his name. Feeling a rising sense of panic, she asked some passers-by if they had seen him. No one had, and Amelia began to cry. Losing Archie was traumatic enough, but if she were to lose Jim as well, she simply would not be able to bear it. After 3 hours of fruitless searching, Amelia set off for home. Jim, it seemed, had disappeared into thin air. As Amelia turned the corner into the mews, her heart leapt. There he was, on the doorstep. He was curled up, tail wagging, with Grace beside him and Archie keeping careful watch. Archie started to walk towards her. His face was completely expressionless. She had no idea what he was thinking. Jim, having no such reserve, bounded over and almost knocking her over, let out a bark of pure pleasure. By now she was crying. Were they tears of pain or joy? She thought she would never see Archie again, and yet here he was, in her street, outside her house and with her dog. Amelia allowed herself to think how much he seemed to belong there. "Amelia," Archie said, taking her in his arms, "I'm so sorry. I made a horrible mistake. I went home and got stuck into all the planning, but all I could think of was you. Last night I couldn't take any more. I went to see my father. When he realised how much I love you, he agreed it would be wrong for me to marry Penelope." Hours later, once Jim had been given a large bowl of chicken, Archie and Amelia sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Archie took Amelia's hand. "Can you ever forgive me?" he asked, explaining that he had adored his mother. Her death had been so devastating that Archie had convinced himself he was doing the right thing and agreeing to marry his mother's choice of bride. In the end, though, it had been his father who had put him right. They had talked late into the night about matters of the heart, and his father had told Archie how much in love with Archie's mother he had been when they married. Archie had understood every word, because that is exactly how he felt about Amelia. Once Archie started talking about Amelia, he had found it impossible to stop, and his father very soon had come to see that this was not some passing fancy, but true love. Amelia listened as Archie talked openly about how deeply he felt about her. Archie's father had been sure that if Amelia was even half the girl that Archie had described, then his late wife would have thoroughly approved of the match. It brought a tear to his eye to see his son so grown up and so obviously in love. Eventually, after so much talking, Amelia began to feel sleepy. Archie and Grace left, and she and Jim turned in. Her mind was whirring. Archie wanted her back, but could she trust him when he said he would not leave again? She felt so unsure about everything. She fell asleep and dreamed of Aaron's Day. Life on the island had been so simple. She saw the lands on the hillside and the mists rolling in over the sea, with distant pipes providing the soundtrack. She missed her parents, and in her fitful sleep they were back together again, tucking into banana custard in the kitchen. Amelia woke to the sound of her alarm. She called Sir Douglas and explained what had happened. As an artist, he was all too familiar with grand passions. He was understanding and told Amelia that she should follow her heart. Amelia took Jim for a walk. Worried that he would run off again, she kept him firmly at heel. Unused to Amelia being so strict, Jim kept rolling his eyes at her and tugging at the lead. Patting him on the head, but not relenting, Amelia walked briskly through the gates of the park and headed for the rose garden. Enjoying the heady scent of the flowers, she thought back to the night before. Archie had seemed sincere and genuine, and he had looked awful, as if he had been pining as much for her as she had for him. But what if it went wrong? She did not think she could go through all that pain again. On the other hand, surely it was worth taking a chance on a love this deep. We fit perfectly, Amelia thought. Archie truly does feel like my other half. And remembering how eaten up with jealousy she was when she had imagined him with Penelope, only confirmed how deep her feelings ran. When Amelia arrived home, Archie was waiting for her, clearly exhausted, as if he had not slept all night. He looked pleadingly at her. She invited him in, and they sat on the sofa facing each other. The pain in his eyes was evident, and Amelia felt a rush of love. Archie took her hand and turned to face her. He opened his mouth to speak, but she stopped him. "I love you, Archie," she said, leaning to kiss him. "Oh, Amelia," he sighed, seeming as if he might cry at any moment. The dogs, clearly believing they were missing out on something, chose that moment to leap onto the sofa and cover Amelia and Archie in slobbering kisses. "Well, they clearly approve," Archie said, taking Amelia into his arms and vowing that he would never let her go again. Amelia sighed and snuggled closer to him. Sir Douglas had been right. When it had come down to it, she knew she could not live without Archie. "I need to use the phone," Archie said suddenly, interrupting the most wonderful silence. He seemed rather agitated. "What now?" Amelia felt put out. They were together for the first time in months. Who on earth could he need to call now? "I need to book a flight," he said distractedly. "Where are you going?" she asked with evident disappointment. "Peru," he replied. "I need to ask for your father's permission." "Permission for what?" Amelia was feeling confused. "To marry you, of course." He smiled indulgently, as if explaining a complicated point to a small child. "You want to get married?" she asked incredulously. "Oh, Amelia, I'm sorry. Of course, I should ask you properly." With that, Archie got down on one knee, took Amelia's hand, and turning to face her, said, "Amelia, darling, please make me the happiest man in the world by agreeing to become my wife." Amelia, with tears in her eyes, simply said, "Yes, please."